Let freedom ring this afternoon at 2 with Sean Hannity, right before Joe Walsh at 5 on AM 560. The Answer.
Dan and Amy back at Danley's in Northbrook, where we're broadcasting part of our AM 560 Signature Bank Business Tour, and talking a little bit about Jim Comey and the reactions that are coming in to his interview with Clinton Foundation donor Zero on Sunday night, talking to David French from National Review about that. And the thing that strikes me, the reactions from career FBI, even people that were inclined to give him the benefit of the doubt, that didn't like the way that he was fired by Trump, that had fond memories of working for him. So many of those individuals are now joining the chorus of people who think essentially Comey has jumped the shark, that he has gone way too far in self-promotion and self-aggrandizement and self-interest at the expense of the agency.
Yeah,
and
he gave up his oath to respect the agency and to remain silent. You don't deal with past issues and current issues while you're an FBI agent.
Jim Gagliano saying, CNN law enforcement analyst saying the other day that
he was
seeing the diminution of a 6'8" man into a Lilliputian. Jack Garcia, 25-year veteran of the FBI, said this man has tarnished the position, that position, FBI director, by offering positions and attacking the President of the United States. It was, quote, insane, unquote, for the former FBI director to offer an opinion on whether the Russian government had compromising information on Trump, just as one more example. Chris Wecker has an op-ed at Fox News, 24-year FBI veteran, taking him to task on those and many other issues. So let's get more insights from this community. And for that, we're pleased to be joined by Ron Hosko, who is a former FBI Assistant Director, now President of the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund. Ron, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it's good to be with you guys.
What was your reaction to the Comey interview?
Well, you know, I think I know Comey a little bit differently than some of the folks you just mentioned. I did have the opportunity to work with and for him before I retired. And so I kind of had I guess a front row seat to Jim Comey, the person, as opposed to, I think, the Jim Comey set off in a distance who's writing a book now. And so in my mind, I separate those two things. I really enjoyed working with Jim Comey. I thought he was a refreshing change. He's what the Bureau needed at the time. He was incredibly gifted as a speaker, someone who could put together speeches that were compelling, personally warm. You know, it was hard not to like him personally, and I think every employee that he touched kind of felt that you know, it's about me, not about him. There was a personal affection and warmth that it was felt throughout the workforce. That being said, and I am certainly among those who were offended by the way that he was fired by Trump, you know, which I thought was completely undignified and despicable. However, now we are less than a year later, and he has this book out. And I think, like a lot of other voices, look, I think that I don't know who his book is going to appeal to, because the country is so divided. Those who are full-on Trump supporters see whatever Comey says as a lie and a betrayal. Those who are full-on Hillary supporters think he turned the election and destroyed her presidency in its infancy, and so you know, there's a I guess maybe a narrow swath in the middle that Comey sees as folks who are still capable of separating political views from reason, that maybe he can appeal to and say, my judgments were apolitical and reasonable.
Well, but correct me if I'm wrong. Don't you take an oath to keep matters private? And when you become an FBI agent, that you don't talk about pending investigations that you were a part of that are still going on, especially against the president, and then, you know, your past work that you've done.
Well, there's some nuances to that. First, you take an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution, and you do sign. I'm sure I did way back a non-disclosure agreement that basically prohibits you from disclosing sensitive, ongoing case information, and mostly FBI agents aren't going to talk about prior cases either. They're talked about in court as hearings are held or as trials are held. So there is that sensitivity concern, and my supposition is I'm sure Jim Comey had this book go through pre-publication review by DOJ to say, okay, there's nothing so sensitive that it cannot be revealed in the way the book reveals it. And it sounds as though he's taken some steps not to reveal some of those inner workings on hundreds of thousands and thousands of cases that the FBI has ongoing.
Let's go back to his judgment. Yeah, let's go back to his judgment calls though. David French, who we just spoke with, made the point, and he makes the point in his piece in National Review, that Comey lays out the standard that is supposed to be applied, the facts and the rule of law, the facts and what the law says. And then he proceeds to explain to Stephanopoulos, as he did to some extent to Congress, how he brought in considerations other than the facts and the law, and in terms of the Hillary investigation, and now with respect to his reviews of the Trump investigation. So, address that in terms of how well he served the agency and by extension the American people.
Well, I think that, that's to Amy's point as well. Here he is, he's no longer the FBI director, he's a book writer, and he's trying to sell books. And, my supposition is that, what sells books is salacious conflict. It is, his own personal subjective views and sentiments. It's not the facts and the law. He's certainly drifted outside of that. And frankly, I think that's where he finds himself in trouble with a lot of current and former FBI agents who think that, and I am among them in this regard, that is beneath the dignity of the position that he held just a year ago. I think in a lot of ways it's beneath Jim Comey himself, who I see as an ethical and moral man. I think it's beneath him. And it is, frankly, the slippery slope of doing interviews like the Stephanopoulos interview and others that I guess he's doing this week, where he's going to be asked charged, loaded questions, and he's going to have to figure out, do I answer this, or do I let it hang like he did about the allegation about Russian prostitutes in a hotel room, where he says, I can't rule it out because he doesn't know the facts, but he's still entertaining the question. And I think all of those areas that seem like they are tinged with revenge, they are beneath the dignity of the position, are very, very troubling to the current and the former workforce, because at the end of the day, he carries those three little letters around with him that mark us all, that we all carry around with us, whether you're a current or a former employee. And the risk is that the public judges us all by his acts, by his words now as the no longer FBI director. I think it diminishes the organization.
What about
that part's disappointing.
What about the no longer deputy director, Andy McCabe, and that report issued by Horowitz, the Inspector General for the FBI, which details a pattern of lying to further his interests, perhaps his wife's political interests at the expense of the agency's interests? Lying to the FBI, that's a crime if you're a civilian. Should Andy McCabe be prosecuted criminally?
Well, first, I read the report on Friday. I was very interested in the contents of it, as I am in the future report that comes out about the Hillary investigation. I want to see the details. And now I've seen the details, and I think that the Inspector General makes a very, very strong case that Andy lied intentionally with a purpose on multiple occasions, and he suffered the fate that other agents and support employees have suffered in the past, which is you're subject to termination for that sort of activity. And so it is very disappointing when you see FBI senior leadership. And look, we're going to see it again. We're going to see it with Strzok and Page and the text messages. That criticism is going to, I'm sure, resurface with an Inspector General report. We'll see what the sanction becomes. But these things coalescing at the highest levels of the FBI are very, very disappointing for me, and disturbing, certainly for a knowing and observant public, because it gives some voice to the notion that there's a deep state up there. There's political or self-serving shenanigans taking place. And so, first, I don't envy Chris Wray, because he's got to rebuild his top-level management team. I think he's doing that, and I think he's trying to keep the FBI off the radar to some extent with all this activity. I think he's being deliberately low-key. Good for him. But it's disappointing that to see that in black and white about the number 2 guy in the FBI. And I fear there's a bit more to come about this as well.
What about criminal prosecution, lying to the FBI, or is he above the law?
No, it's not above the law. So here's how the FBI approaches that, and the Inspector General, I think, early on in these inquiries, and these inquiries, you saw the movements behind the FBI's inspection division in that report. So they're the first ones to start to conduct an inquiry. And generally speaking, this sort of activity, first they're going to look to what was leaked. If it was sensitive national security information, be one thing, and potentially subject to prosecution. Here, a self-serving leak of this nature, where it's about a criminal case, it's not actually sensitive information about the case. It's about the relationship between FBI and DOJ. I don't see that as criminal, and I'm sure as the inspectors are approaching the deputy director for an interview, or the Inspector General is, they've already assessed that this is an administrative, i.e. personnel matter, not a criminal matter. They're going to give him a warning, a waiver of rights that he's compelled to sign, that basically says you must talk to us. And in doing so, you're basically giving up your Fifth Amendment protections. You
so
don't
he's
have the
indemnified
right to
from
silent.
criminal prosecution, right?
That's right. And so you can't use his statement against him, or his statements against him, in a subsequent prosecution. I just don't see this as being prosecutable. But Andy McCabe got a pretty severe sentence. He was fired from the FBI 26 hours before he was eligible to retire.
Well, don't you agree that he should have been fired, though? I mean, at the very least.
Oh, I don't disagree with that. Look, I think that other personnel are fired for lack of candor. It's one of those things. Louis Freeh, back in the 90s, established what was known as the bright line policy, and there were 2 things that he made it very clear to the entire workforce: you can expect to be fired. Lack of candor was one of those 2. The other one was drinking and driving. And so we knew then that the minimum drinking age for FBI agents was 57. That's when you could retire. Yeah.
He is,
well said.
He is Ron Hosko, former FBI Assistant Director and President for the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund. Ron, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Good to be with you guys.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
This is the